We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we record this podcast and pay our respects to elders past and present. We recognise their ongoing connection to land, waters and culture. We recognise that sovereignty was never ceded.
The case of Leongatha's Erin Patterson, who was recently convicted of murdering 3 relatives with a deadly mushroom meal, captured headlines around the world.
I'm devastated. I love them.
But did you know an even more prodigious killer lived in the same small Victorian farming community in the 1930s? Join Leongatha journalist Matt Dunn and special guests including author Katherine Kovacic and former Victoria Police Detective Narelle Fraser as they unearth the chilling story of serial killer Arnold Sodeman on Sodeman, the Schoolgirl Strangler. Episode 7. Hanged.
He's already found guilty by the time he's walking out with that smile on his face. But yeah, there's definitely more going on here.
I don't know how they can sleep at night, to be honest. I've never understood. And I've met some great defence lawyers, but I still don't understand.
This episode contains adult themes. Listener discretion is advised. As Arnold Sodeman's 1936 trial approached, he underwent psychiatric evaluation at Pentridge Prison. Though he confessed to 4 murders, he was only charged with the killing of June Rushmere, where the evidence was strongest and the witnesses knew him personally. The earlier cases were riddled with flawed testimony and prior wrongful indictments, making additional charges risky. Sodeman's confessions may have come under police duress, but their descriptions were clear. Though he confessed to the murders, there was one crime he would always deny.
I made a run towards her and she ran into the bush. I ran after her and caught her around the neck and she started. I then took her bloomers off and jammed them in her mouth. I then got a belt from her frock and tied it over her mouth and around the back. I then tore a strip off her dress and tied her hands behind her back and left her. I took her shoes off and then her stocking and stuffed it into her mouth. And I then we were talking together and started pulling each other and skylarking. Then I grabbed her by the throat and she dropped her hand into my ribs and I started tickling her in the ribs. She kept poking me in the ribs. And I then grabbed her by the neck and she fell to the ground. She went limp. I placed her on the vacant allotment. I then dragged her into the bathroom and let her throat go. She fell on the floor. If I had sexual intercourse with this girl, I have no recollection of it.
I speak with the author of The Schoolgirl Strangler, Katherine Kovacic, about Sodeman's dramatic trial.
First of all, when he arrived in court, so this is the case. This is the trial of, probably fair to say, certainly the trial of the decade. And the public gallery is full. 150 people can fit into the public gallery. It's full. They've got the doors open so that they can have people in the corridors and in the vestibule outside. That's the extent of interest in here. So you can imagine they're going through their preliminary things. There's a buzz. There's noise. And then when they bring him in, it goes deadly quiet. They all watch him come in. Walks in normally. Doesn't really look at anybody, but he's not looking particularly upset. He's in the dock. He sits down and basically he puts his chin in his hand and he looks at the floor for most of the proceedings for the rest of the time while they're impaneling the jury, while the opening statements are being made. First day in court, he barely looks at anybody. And that's basically par for the course, the entire thing. He doesn't look worried. He doesn't, he looks up every time they announce a new witness, checks out who's coming in, then chin back in his hand, and looking at the floor again. He's not fazed. He's not worried at all. And finally, at the end of this trial, which is quite a brief trial, certainly by modern standards, it's a very brief trial. When he's brought out at the end of it, people wait around, they wait for the verdict, and they wait to see him brought out. And he's smiling. At the end of the whole thing, he's smiling.
So this is after he's been found guilty of June's murder.
And sentenced to death.
He emerges with a grin on his face.
Yep.
Wow. Is that part of a performance, or is he just enjoying the limelight?
Oh, I think there's a lot of things at play. I think he's definitely enjoying the limelight. There is performance at play as well, because In the lead up to the trial, there's a few letters coming out from him to his wife from Pentridge Prison. There's little bits of information dribbling out that we find out later. And his story just changes ever so slightly. And, it sounds like he's been talking to his defence counsel and this is how we're going to play it because, he's already confessed to police. He's given them chapter and verse, very detailed descriptions of each of those 4 murders. Even Mina Griffiths, which now is 5 years ago, he's given them absolute detail and he's taken them, he's driven them around the streets. This is the way we came. This is where we stopped. This is where we got on and off the tram. He's remembered it all in great detail. I think we'll be talking more about this detail later. But then we start to see these things in his letters when he's saying to his wife now, who he refers to as doll, something came over me. This is what I was battling with. When I was sitting there, those long nights staring into the fire. The things that come over me. So he's never mentioned this before. This is news to her, but suddenly we're seeing this little subtle shift, and it almost feels as though someone's saying, "This is how we're going to frame things when we get to court." So I think there's that smile. He's already found guilty by the time he's walking out with that smile on his face. But yeah, there's definitely more going on
here. Yeah. So he's perhaps playing the crazy guy.
Well, it's interesting because Sodeman's never put on the stand. That's the right of the accused. They don't have to take the stand if the defence counsel don't put them up there. And I think that was part of the ploy because, as we see time and time again in the people he talks to, the people that he knew in Leongatha, the officers of the court that he encounters, the prison wardens, the medical people, he comes across as a very reasonable, very rational man. And so I think if you put him on the stand when they're trying to say, well, something comes over him and he has this obsessive impulse that he cannot control and therefore not guilty by reason of insanity, that's what we want the jury to find. He's not going to give that vibe at all. He's too calm. He's too collected. He's too reasonable.
Although he was playing the part, Sodeman was bad rather than mad. While the idea of psychopathy had been around for some time, it did not enter the medical mainstream until 1941, with the publication of The Mask of Sanity by American psychiatrist Harvey M. Checkley, who would write that the psychopath presents an important and challenging enigma for which no adequate solution has yet been found. Master deceivers who secretly possess no moral or ethical restraints, yet behave in public with excellent function. It was Sodeman all over. But for a jury in 1936, Sodeman's confessions were enough to mark him as insane.
That's really interesting. We see when they're reading out in court the confessions that he gave to the police. They're very detailed and they're very clinical. And subsequently, the defence would bring supposed medical witnesses to argue that he was in a sort of a weird fugue state and he couldn't remember and he didn't know what he was doing at this time. But we had these detailed things that I did this, I put my hands around her throat. But then the thing is afterwards, and I walked away, and I delivered the smokes to the guy that I'd, bought the smokes for earlier. And it's just that clinical. And I, in the case of June Rushmer, and I went about to try and make it look like I was somewhere else. So, for a man who's supposedly temporarily lost his mind, doesn't know what he's doing, but then immediately, like a snap of the fingers, he's out of it and he's planning, he's covering his tracks, he's, doing the normal thing, he's acting normal. And this idea that if alcohol was some sort of trigger and he subsequently knew about it, which is what, that it came back to him later in bits and pieces and he put it all back together and, approximated what must have happened. But surely any reasonable person is going to A, not drink, B, get themselves some professional help, C, confess rather than just going on and on. And we can't believe possibly that in those years, these were the only 4 times that he drank alcohol. I don't think so. And we have, witnesses in the case of Ethel Belshaw who were saying, well, he was drinking with us. I was matching him drink for drink. I wasn't drunk. He wasn't drunk. Hazel Wilson, I wouldn't say a street smart girl, but a girl who was, aware of, the world. She went out to dances. She would have encountered boys and men who drank. She would know at what a drunk guy looked like, and she would know that the potential danger signals there. I think this idea that alcohol is, somehow putting him into this, very Jekyll and Hyde-like state is a little bit too convenient.
Yeah. Actually, I'll tell you what, I was just thinking about the doctors, Dr. Allery and
Dr. Philpott. Yep.
Dr. Philpott. Yeah.
Yep.
It kind of sounds like a TV show, Dr. Philpott. Are they using legitimate science when they take the stand? I mean, where are they deriving this information from? For the listener, the doctor's testimonies were used by Sodeman's defence team to bolster the argument that his homicidal rages were sparked by drinking alcohol.
So Dr. Philpott he's our government medical examiner. So he is effectively the prison doctor. He's the guy who is there when they hang people and says, I was there, I watched him drop, he was hanged till he was dead. So he's actually has no psychiatric or psychological training. He spends time with Sodeman in prison. He sits with him at least 4 times and talks to him. And he said, basically he comes up with this, he comes up with a theory that it's alcohol that he can't remember. Coming back to he has no psychiatric training. He is relying on what Sodeman tells him. So if Sodeman says, I didn't remember or whatever, he actually effectively says in court, I believe Sodeman, and they say, what about all this detailed confession he gave the police? And he said, effectively he insinuates that perhaps that was confected by the police rather than given verbatim by Sodeman. So he's siding with this. And again, this speaks to what a clever manipulator Sodeman is, that, he presents as normal, he presents as rational. And I think that's where he gets people like Dr. Philpott, because coming back to that idea that in the 1930s, they didn't know what a serial killer was. They didn't have this understanding of people who would kill someone because it made them feel good. And so I think they start in a position of this man, a man who goes and strangles a 6-year-old girl who he knows, or in the case of some of the other girls that he doesn't know, a young girl he doesn't know, their starting point is he must be insane to do that, because there's nothing in their training, there's nothing in the police annals or the medical annals that say this is a psychopath, this is a psychopathic killer. So they starting point is, who would do a thing like that? Only an insane person would do like that, and they work back from there. And the way it was actually put to Philpott in court by defence counsel was, forget any conversations you've had with Sodeman and anything you actually know about him, but let's assume that A, he was, completely under the influence of alcohol, B, for the sake of argument, he did strangle her, and C, and so they kind of framed it in a way that, knowing absolutely nothing about this person, what would you think? And I think he must be insane, because they've got no background there. Ellery, Dr. Ellery is a different case. He is actually a very esteemed psychiatrist. He's worked at the mental asylum for many years. He consults elsewhere, but he is also very anti-capital punishment, and he also has his own theories that all crime is due to some sort of neurological imbalance. So he wants to argue from his own point of view before he even gets into the courtroom. So, he's the ideal witness for the defence, because he's always going to lead us away from the capital punishment option.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So I'll tell you that one of the things that got me and really horrified me was the fact that the defence team called into question the morals, I guess, of Mina and Hazel, and sort of suggested that, maybe that was a factor in the way things turned out.
Yeah, the old, they were asking for it. The girls were asking for it. So in Mina's case, there was evidence that she had been sexually assaulted at some stage, either before or after she was killed. Sperm was found. No way of proving where that sperm had come from. So there was this really grubby line of questioning about, when do you think this happened? Could it have happened up to 12 hours before she was murdered? And so this little 12-year-old Catholic girl who'd been, playing with her siblings in the park, there's this question mark of, has someone else sexually assaulted her, or does she have a partner? Does she have a boyfriend? Is she a slut? That's the bottom line. In Hazel Wilson's case, she's this 16-year-old girl. One of her friends is put on the stand in the June Rushman trial as well. Did she go out with boys? Do you go out with boys? And that was part of the coronial inquest for Hazel as well. What happened when you went out with boys? And so this whole idea that, she was a loose girl. There was one instance where one of her friends would testify, well, we ended up with these boys down in Sandringham and they left us there and we had to walk all the way home. Now, that sounds like girls who actually don't put out, to use a very blunt term. You don't get dumped 12 miles from home, at midnight for no reason. And the reason usually is that you're not doing what the boys want you to do. So the fact that it got there, and in the Hazel Wilson coronial inquest, there was this thing about when they were trying to stitch up her father, about how he would, he was nasty and he'd lock her in a room and she was afraid of him. And the judge actually said, that's what a good father would do if he was worried about, what his daughter was getting up to. So again, that idea that, this girl wasn't behaving herself.
Former Victoria Police Detective Narelle Fraser says victim blaming is something that still persists today. I guess I was just going to ask, is that something that you've witnessed during your career, that sort of, or painting the victim as, promiscuous, sort of putting themselves in a situation they shouldn't be in?
Oh, God, yeah. The defence's job, as you just alluded to, it is to represent the accused, and that's their priority. And basically their job is to try and get them off, or to lessen, I suppose, or reduce the severity of maybe the sentence or whatever. In the end, they use any tactic they can within the confines of law, obviously. And if a tactic works to besmirch the victim's reputation, well, so be it. Yeah. It's about their priority is the perpetrator. That's their job. I don't know how they can sleep at night, to be honest. I've never understood, and I've met some great defence lawyers, but I still don't understand how they can represent somebody that has done such a reprehensible act. I just don't understand. But then people don't understand how, maybe I can sit with a victim and hear some, terrible stories of sexual assaults, for instance. It's a job. While I don't agree with what they do, the tactics, they're doing it within the confines of the law. And if they weren't, the judge, the magistrate, they'd be pulled up. So I have spoken to so many victims of crime, and they all feel the same, that it's called victim blaming. And it's common. It is all about attacking the victim's credibility. What she wore, like you said, was she a bit loose with her morals? Was she promiscuous? That's all they really, they're just trying to besmirch her, generally her reputation. To me, it's shameful.
Narelle believes that even today, victims of crime are poorly treated in the Australian legal system.
I just find it really disappointing that the cases still centre around the perpetrator. and, you know, what he did generally, let's say, what he did, why he did it. And the victim's life is hardly acknowledged. So often the victim's behaviours are only included in the case when it helps the perpetrator.
Yeah.
Like, I speak to so many people that say, as a victim, they want to be heard. They want to be given an opportunity to tell the court about them, and they're not given that opportunity. It is all about the perpetrator, and I get a bit sick of that. I think let's hear, like, the only time we really hear about the victim is the victim impact statement. And that's only something reasonably new, you know, like that wasn't happening years ago when particularly with Sodeman, I don't think, victim impact statements. And, you know, the victim, who would ever choose to get up in a witness box and be hammered by the defence? There's not many people that would do that, and that's still happening today.
Poor Joyce Griffiths, now 14, was again brought to court. This time her testimony was brief, though she was still forced to relive the horror of her older sister's abduction and murder, when a stranger came upon the sisters playing in Faulkner Park and offered Mina money to go a message.
At least these days, the victim they can choose to be in another room so they don't actually have to face the perpetrator. But imagine somebody doing what Sodeman did and having to face him in court and tell the court what he did with him standing there. Like, just the intimidation, how could you tell a proper story? Like, the fear. I just can't imagine it'd be terrible.
While the prosecution case was undoubtedly strong, the defence team questioned police statements attributed to Sodeman, inferring that they had either been coerced or written for him. Narelle agreed. Preempted one of my other questions because it sort of came under scrutiny in the court, you know.
And so it should.
Sexual intercourse. So are they really his words?
No. You know, I've read that. I haven't read the statements, refreshed my memory, as we say in court. I haven't refreshed my memory with the statements, but I just remember reading them and thinking they were very policey. The jargon, it's very policey, and there's so many words that police use that aren't in the common discussions and conversations with the general public. And this is a terrible thing to say, but I have no doubt the police wrote his statements. And it's a terrible thing to say, but I feel like he was probably forced, coerced, even threatened into signing them as true and correct. Like, I think he did the crimes, absolutely. But I think the police seem to have forced a lot of evidence rather than just let the evidence speak for itself. And I have no doubt they wrote those statements, or pretty much most of them, maybe not 100% of the statements, but they... I just think it's a lesson in just letting the evidence speak for itself. Let him write the statement. We've got an eyewitness. Okay, it's not going to be perfect, the statement.
Well, you would have thought the case was pretty solid on its own.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would he have come to that? Would he have made those statements? Obviously in different words, but would he have made those statements without duress?
I think he may have made the statements, but it wouldn't have been so succinct. He probably would have talked a lot about a lot of irrelevant things. He might have gone on and on, You know, like these statements were like 2 pages each or something, weren't they? Like if a normal person is going to provide a statement to someone, they generally don't understand the rules of evidence, and they will just they'll just talk and talk about all sorts of stuff. Like this was very. I have no doubt it was written by a police person.
And in a normal police transcript, interview transcript, it would go on for pages and pages and pages, and there'd be a lot of waffle. But then be those little gems that provide the evidence.
Those little gems, you're right. Oh, when you see those little gems, it's just like they light up the page.
Yeah, I bet.
You know? But also I've got to remember that years and years ago, we typed everything. There was nothing. There was no audio. And you virtually could write whatever you wanted. It's hard to imagine that the police, you know, I did too. You had to type out a statement. And you're supposed to do it word for word. I was lucky because I could touch type. I was a secretary for so long. But some of the boys, they really struggled with their typing. So, I'd put in so much information in a statement because I can actually type what they say quickly. But, in another way, I sort of feel they're probably trying to condense the statement. I don't have a trouble with condensing it to a point because we don't want to know what he had for breakfast, for instance, if it's not relevant. But, you start picking and choosing. It's very dangerous to start doing that.
Yeah. In its bid to prove to the jury that Sodeman was insane and therefore not responsible for his actions, defence lawyer Mr. Burke would proclaim,
"If a man is insane, he cannot have a guilty mind. Before this trial is concluded, I hope I will be able to establish to your satisfaction that on December 1, 1935, Arnold Sodeman was in fact insane. He was suffering from such a disease of the mind as to render it impossible to know the nature and the quality of his act. He would be unable to appreciate the difference between right and wrong. It will be shown that the accused has such a burden of inheritance through his parentage that he is a man of unstable mind, and that he is liable to attacks of mental derangement. All he needs to get him into that state is some stimulus, and alcohol provides that stimulus. Because of this defect in his mental makeup coupled with liquor, it will be shown that he was not responsible and did not know what he was doing. If you accept this, it is a complete answer to the charge of murder."
Unsurprisingly, the jury did not accept this explanation. At 5:15 p.m. on Tuesday, February 18, 1936, the jury retired to consider their verdict. Moments later, Defence Counsel raised the possibility of manslaughter with the judge. A legal discussion followed with the Crown Prosecutor, debating whether the jury could lawfully return such a verdict. At 5:22, the jury was returned to the courtroom. Justice Gavin Duffy addressed them, noting a request from the defence to clarify a point left out of his summary. There was evidence, he said, that Sodeman may have been drunk when he seized June Rushmere by the throat, perhaps too impaired to grasp, as a sober man would, that his actions could be fatal. While he put this point to the jury, he obviously didn't give it much credence.
"I think you're entitled to know that and take it into consideration. But I think I am correct in saying there is no evidence as regards drunkenness."
7:48 p.m, the jury returned just 2.5 hours after retiring. The foreman stood and delivered their verdict, guilty of murder. Arnold Sodeman remained silent. Justice Gavin Duffy then pronounced the ultimate sentence. Although Sodeman appeared to be unperturbed by the idea of going to the gallows, his lawyers quickly launched an appeal.
This is actually really interesting. There's one point where he's on remand in Pentridge, and he writes to the government and says, "Look, I'm not going to appeal anymore. That's fine. I'll accept things." But his lawyers, they want to keep appealing. So immediately after the trial, the guilty verdict's brought down on the 18th of February. 2 days later, 20th of February, the lawyers announced that we're going for an appeal. And in this case, as in all sort of appeals, it has to be on points of law. It can't just be that you didn't like the verdict. It has to be that the judge or there's been some sort of erring in the court system. And in this case, it was that the judge had not directed or had misdirected the jury in some way. And so we're appealing on those grounds. So 20th of February. So by the 5th of March, we've got the full court of the Supreme Court of Victoria. So that's 3 judges. And it takes them, basically in a day, they've decided that there was no issue. The judge didn't err in his findings. He didn't misdirect the jury. Nothing to see here. Mm-hmm. After that, so 26th of March, the Premier of Victoria sets the execution date for 6th of April. Sodeman is in prison at this time. He's not fussed. He's not bothered at all. He comes out. He plays chess with another prisoner who is also on death row and is subsequently hanged. But he's quite relaxed. He's eating full meals, sleeping well at night. Nothing to see here. He is just not fazed. So we've got that execution date in April. But then his lawyers decide, even though he supposedly said, "I'm not going to appeal this anymore," we're going to the High Court of Australia. This is 4 judges. That happens end of March, start of April. So again, that's just 3 or 4 weeks after that previous appeal has failed. In the case of the High Court, you have 4 judges. They were equally split as to whether there had been errors in the way the case was handled. But what happens is when you have an equal split, it defers back to the Supreme Court finding, which was there's no problem. So we're still here. Sodeman's lawyers aren't going to give up yet. They've decided they're going to go all the way to the highest possible court of appeal in the Commonwealth, which is the Privy Council in London.
Despite deliberations in high places, neither the public nor the press was supportive of Sodeman. The Bulletin, a long-running Sydney periodical leading with the headline "The Sodeman Horror," opined that sterilisation of the unfit, that is to say, the insane, the imbecile and the feeble-minded under restraint or surveillance, and the degenerate convicted of sex offences, has not hitherto been a political issue in Australia and Maoriland. It concluded by saying that medical science should not be used to defend child killers, but rather provide the nation and the individual, above all the female child, a degree of protection from mad killers and degenerates, which our criminal laws do not and our police cannot provide.
Now, to get all the paperwork and what have you across to the UK by airmail, that means we need at least a delay in the execution date. And they very cleverly say to the Premier, whose decision this is, or the government, well, can you delay the execution date a little bit more? Or you could always just, commute that to life in prison. So they're playing that little card. We get the extended execution date. It goes out to May, but then they need a bit more time, so subsequently it is set for the 1st of June. They brief a man in London. He goes to the Privy Council. He puts out chapter and verse. He goes through the case and details all the points where supposedly these errors of law occurred. He cites previous case history, and he appeals to these guys. When the Crown Barrister, who is, arguing against any change to the sentence, stands up, he gets about 2 minutes into his introduction and they say, "We don't need to hear any more. They've made their decision. No appeal. It's all chucked out. The execution's on." So I think a lot of this appeal was actually the barristers. A couple of them, his Australian lawyers, went on to become quite senior, very well respected lawyers. So I think they've got their reputations on the line here.
I was going to ask, was it about careers rather than
so.
Sodeman?
Yeah, there is. And there is already a debate going on in Australia about capital punishment. So various members of I believe the Law Council of Australia have signed a letter that says, this guy shouldn't hang. But Sodeman himself is saying he doesn't want to, spend the rest of his life in prison. He literally says, I would rather die than spend the rest of my life in prison. So, he doesn't want to spend his time in penitentiary. He certainly doesn't want to spend his life in a mental asylum as they were in those days. So I think that's part of the reason why he's so calm about the outcome. He doesn't want to be there. So, but yes, there's egos on the line here. There's a lot of letters in the paper. There's letters being sent to the courts, to the Premier. Certainly the people of Leongatha are furious. They're absolutely furious that this is and it's only, it's a very short time in terms of what we see with legal appeal today. This is 6 months, from go to woe, that he gets through all these appeals. But the people of Leongatha are furious. They want this to end. They want him to end. They want him gone. And there are letters coming into the paper, not from around Australia, saying, he has to suffer. He has to go. So a lot of sentiment going on here.
Those people who were desperate to see Sodeman hanged would get their wish on June 1, 1936.
To give him the final date of his execution, the head of the prison comes in and says, June 1st, he says, thanks. And then when he's walked to the gallows and he has the white cap pulled down over his face, doesn't say a word, nothing to say to anybody. And even that speaks to his control and calm, because there's a book called Particulars of Executions, which is the effectively the hangman's logbook of Pentridge. When you read through that and other cases, and it tells you, when people have chucked the wobblies or been difficult, or they've had to sedate them, or they've had to use several people to manhandle them to the gallows, and that time frame of 1 minute tells you everything you need to go. They brought him from the cell. He walked straight out. He walked into the position. Didn't give them a moment's problem, and that was that.
The official record was stark. Death was instantaneous. There was no movement of any kind. This has been the last episode of Sodeman, the Schoolgirl Strangler. My proof listener and editorial assistant is the very talented A. Dunn. That's Amelia Dunn, my daughter, though we generally call her Millie. Thanks goes to my former work colleague and Leongatha local Mark Drury for the introductory voiceover and theme music. The voice actors for this episode are Leongatha Lyric Theatre's Dan Laurie and Andrew Newton. Dan played the parts of Sodeman and Justice Gavin Duffy, while Andrew played the role of Sodeman's defence lawyer, the esteemed Mr. Berg. Special thanks for this episode and the entire series goes to my wonderful guests, Katherine Kovacic and Narelle Fraser. I should say in closing, while the case of Leongatha's Erin Patterson has been used as a promotional hook for this series, Leongatha is a great place to live. No, there's nothing in the water down here. It's just the odd bod that has given us a bad reputation. But they're in every community, big and small. Just pray they're not a neighbour of yours, or worse still, a relative.
When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. They're the home of the #1 checkout on the planet and the not-so-secret Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales happening. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds and Skims use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/start selling. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/start selling to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/start selling.